If this global manipulation has been going on, this web of manipulation, connected web, has been going on for a long, long time. But you can pick up one strand of it, which has become a very central strand now, in the 17th century, with a guy called Sabbatai Zevi. He claimed to be a Jewish messiah, and he got this enormous, for its time, following, according to Jewish sources, about 1 million people. And he called himself the Jewish messiah, but he wasn't a follower of Judaism. He wasn't really Jewish in the way that we perceive Jewish. And he created a cult, a death cult, a satanic cult known as Sabbateanism. And what Sabbateanism did was invert everything. So if in Judaism you had a fast day, in Sabbateanism it would be a feast day. If this said don't abuse children, then in Sabbateanism you abuse children. It was a complete inversion. And he was operating in the Ottoman Empire, the Islamic Ottoman Empire. And the Sultan said to him, you either convert to Islam or, we'll sort you out. And so he converted, and a lot of his followers converted. And these became known as Donma or Donme, which means to turn. And this started a technique whereby Sabbateans would pose as one culture or one religion, in this case Judaism, but actually be following this Sabbatean satanic cult religion. And so these Donma operated as followers of Islam within the Ottoman Empire, but they were Sabbatean cultists. You follow this line of Donme, through history, and it's a long story, but I do tell it in the trigger. And you end up realizing that a modern expression of this Donme is the Saudi Arabian royal family. You also find that a guy called Wahhab, from which the extreme form of Saudi-sponsored Islam,
Sunni,
ISIS, etc., comes from, Wahhabism as it's called, was also a Sabbatean. And the British Empire brought Wahhab together with the House of Saud. In fact, his daughter married into the House of Saud. And so you have this fusion at that time, and still now, between the Saudi royal family, fake Islamic royalty, and the Wahhabism extreme head-chopping version of Islam. Another strand of this Sabbateanism came through and manifested as people like the House of Rothschild. They're not Jewish, they are Sabbateans who pose as Jewish while following this satanic religion. Because in the next century, after Sabbatai Zevi, along came Jacob Frank, who Jewish sources that I quote in the book call one of the most frightening people in Jewish history. He was not actually Jewish, except officially. He was another Sabbatean. He claimed to be the reincarnation of Sabbatai Zevi and of the biblical patriarch Jacob. And the cult became known as Sabbatean-Frankism. And he really advanced the infiltration, Donme style, of the Roman Catholic Church. And eventually the whole Christian Zionist movement came out of this, the vast overwhelming majority of which have no idea actually about the background. So this Sabbatean-Frankist cult created Israel, posing as, followers of Judaism, etc., to scam the general Jewish population that they actually represented them, when actually they're a cult. And there's a chapter in the book called Atlantic Crossing, where I talk about how this cult moved in on America. And this is the cult that is protected by this expansion of the definition of anti-Semitism to stop any legitimate investigation of the cult.
So, all right, David, let me ask you a question. As you're watching Israel today, based on where Tim was taking us, and watching about Netanyahu and Barak, and looking at Gant, and looking at what's happening, do you think that this represents the true struggle between the people who think that this Sabbateanism is coming to an end, or they're fighting against it? Because when you watch what's happening in Israel and what's going on between the ruling powers, it's quite a mess that's going on, and it always seems like it's some kind of conflict about who's right and who should be, and elimination or taking back control, those kind of issues.
What you have in this Sabbateanism is the core that's running it, and as you come down from that central core, that peak of the pyramid, if you like, then you've got representatives of it that do fight among themselves. They do want power, and they do want to be at the top of the greasy pole. But this is always controlling that. So what's going on in Israel at the moment, this tussle between Netanyahu and this guy, Benny Gantz, in the outcome, it will be basically the same. And of course, the kingmaker is this guy, Lieberman, who's so far right, he meets himself coming back. So let me just give you a little sequence on the basis of what I've just described, because this Sabbatean-Frankist cult moved in on America. It infiltrated the CIA and these agencies. It infiltrated the Pentagon. It infiltrated and massively funds American politics. It's the cement that connects, like Mossad in Israel with the CIA, etc. Here's a sequence. In 1979, the so-called father of Israeli intelligence, guy called Issa Harel, of Mossad fame, etc., and Mossad and Shin Bet, the domestic intelligence agencies in Israel, is a Sabbatean-Frankist front. And this is why Epstein was connected to Mossad, and why his madam, Ghislaine Maxwell, was the daughter of Bob Maxwell, the newspaper publisher in Britain, who was a Mossad agent. I mean, it all connects. The tentacles go everywhere. So here's a sequence. 1979, Issa Harel told an American journalist that he believed that there was going to be an Islamic attack on New York's biggest building. The same year, 1979, Benjamin Netanyahu established or held a conference in Jerusalem, attended by Father George Bush, about the need for a war on terrorism. And in 1984, he had one in Washington of the same, with all the big wigs of the Republican Party, etc., and the Democrats there. He wrote a book to Netanyahu calling for a war on terrorism. He became prime minister eventually, and in 1996, a guy called Richard Perle, who's very, very much connected to the Pentagon at the time of 9/11, fronted a group of ultra-Zionists to produce a document for him called A Clean Break, basically how to secure the realm being Israel. And this Clean Break document in 1996 called for as much inter-Arab conflict to be generated as possible. It called for Saddam Hussein to be removed from Iraq. And so forth, for Syria to be targeted. And then a year later, the same Richard Perle in America was one of the founders of what you mentioned earlier, a so-called think tank called the Project for the New American Century. This was co-founded by two ultra-Zionists representing Israel, called William Crystal and Robert Kagan. By the way, Robert Kagan's wife is called Victoria Nuland, and she oversaw the coup in Ukraine, much of the background of which was funded by George Soros. This world is very, very, very small when you get to its core. So the following year, the Project for the New American Century, which had among its number in 1997 Dick Cheney, who would be 9/11 de facto president, vice president in officially. It had Donald Rumsfeld, who would be 9/11 defense secretary. It had Paul Wolfowitz, who would be Pentagon deputy defense secretary. It had Dov Zakheim, who was the comptroller of the Pentagon at the time of 9/11 and oversaw the entire budget. John Bolton, still around, trying to bomb anything that moves. He was involved in it as well. The following year, this crowd, 1998, wrote to Bill Clinton urging him to invade Iraq and remove Saddam Hussein. In year 2000, the Project for the New American Century, this crowd, produced a document calling for American troops to fight multiple theater wars in the Middle East and elsewhere to remove regime change a series of governments and leaders. So this Project for the New American Century produced this document in September 2000, and they listed a series of countries they wanted to regime change using American troops. And they were Iraq, Libya, Syria, Iran, which is why they're going for Iran still now, Lebanon, North Korea, leading, quote, to regime change eventually in China, all of which kind of you can see what's happened and what is happening with regard to them.
General Clark was very open about that.
Yeah, General Wesley Clark was speaking on a Democracy Now! Television program in which he describes how he was told all that later, but it was in the document. And so you then had in this document something crucially relevant to 9/11. And that is, it said that this process of transformation that this group demanded using American troops, in other words, of these regime changing these countries, would be necessarily slow, absent, this was the quote, absent some catalyzing or catastrophic and catalyzing event, like a new Pearl Harbor. This was in September 2000. The people that wrote that document came to power with Bush in January 2001. And 9 months after they came to power, America had what Bush called at the time the Pearl Harbor of the 21st century. And as a result of that, 9/11, the sequence of countries has been targeted ever since, one after the other. Iran is in the gun sights now. Now, what makes that even more connecting into this cult, this Israel connection, is that, as I show in the trigger, the ultra-Zionists, shall we call them, before, during, and after 9/11, involved in that whole story, is absolutely phenomenal, fantastic. The ratio is unbelievable. The number of Jewish people in the world is 0.2%. In America, it's 2%. And that what I'm talking about with this cult is a tiny, tiny fraction of that 0.2%. And they themselves are not practicing Judaism. They hate Jews, actually. It's an inversion of Judaism, this cult. And so you had all these different areas before, during, and after covered by ultra-Zionists, and including Michael Chertoff, who oversaw the whole of the non-investigation. The person running the 9/11 Commission that covered the whole thing up was Philip Zelikow, ultra Zionist. And how many people know that in 2001, 200 Israelis were arrested in America for running a spying ring, 140 before 9/11, 60 afterwards, and they were eventually let go by Michael Chertoff. Or that there were 5 Israelis found or seen. They were later arrested. At the time the first tower, the North Tower, was burning, filming it, high-fiving and cheering, and they became known as a result as the Dancing Israelis. They were arrested by the authorities and the FBI, and they were connected to a company called Urban Moving Systems that was headed by a guy who ran that show called Suter, and he was he was questioned, shall we say, by the FBI, who said to this Dominic Suter that we're going to come back and question you again. Well, they didn't, because he was on a plane to Israel, and away he went. And these 5 Israelis who were cheering, and when you read the book, you see they clearly had prior knowledge of the tower being hit, the towers being hit. They were held for 71 days by the FBI, and then they were let go by Michael Chertoff. And so it goes on, one after the other after the other. And
what about the art group, David?
Oh yeah, the art.
What about the group of artists and their connection?
Well, in this spy ring of 200, lots of them were posing as artists. And by the way, according to official documents, the center of the spy ring was a place called Hollywood in Florida, where 15 of the 19 alleged hijackers, including Mohammed Attar, spent time at the same time the ring was operating. When people read the book, they will be stunned at the explosion of connections. Then, of course, you look at the fact that a computer company called P-Tech had control of the computer screens and the computer systems across the Pentagon, across the White House, across the government in general, across the Federal Aviation Administration, across NORAD, the military response system to hijacks that never responded on 9/11 in any way that affected events. And when you realize at the same time that that computer system was controlled on 9/11 by that company, which was run by an ultra-Zionist, you also realize that very same day that a stream of war games, war exercises, scenarios, unprecedented in number, were happening in the skies, the 9/11 skies of America. And
distraction.
Same day.
Same day, same time.
Day.
Yeah.
And one of the scenarios was for a plane to crash into a building, the reconnaissance center in Washington. And the man who decided that this unprecedented number of war games would be carried out in the skies over the same skies as the 9/11 hijackings was Ralph Eberhart, the head of NORAD, the organization that should be responding to hijackings of the 9/11 variety. And that same Ralph Eberhart, 12 hours before the attacks, put the protection level of Pentagon computer systems and military computer systems onto its lowest level. And what you see if people read the book is that not only did the NORAD screens and the FAA screens of traffic controllers have the planes that were flying including the 9/11 planes on the screens, they had lots of simulated planes and war game planes, because if anyone taking part in a real plane in the war game, then air traffic controllers needed to know where it was for safety reasons. But there were lots of simulated planes as part of this war game too. They're known as sim. And they were on the screens live, is what's called sim over live. And I quote one of the NORAD response people at a place called Rome in New York State, where they were orchestrating the response from. He shouts at one point, "Get rid of the goddamn sim," because it was completely destroying their ability to follow events. Now,
and their conversations about realizing, not knowing which one was the sim and which one was the hijacking aircraft.
Exactly.
There was so much of that.
And what you therefore had was external. I explain all this in detail. External control of the computer systems and the air traffic screens, and the ability, because you had real-time backdoor control, to put planes on those screens that didn't exist, and to remove planes like 9/11 planes, the 4 that did exist. Because it's my contention that the planes that hit the buildings, actually didn't hit the building in the Pentagon's case, were not the planes that left the airport. And it's very clear when you see the evidence that that was the case.
Or the plane that did not collapse, that did not crash in Philadelphia. I mean, in Pennsylvania. There was no plane in Pennsylvania.
I go into that in the book. The amount of debris where that plane was supposed to have come down, Flight 93, was ridiculous. There was no plane there. Obviously, the whole story was fake. But this is what you're looking at: a lie so big that people cannot grasp that anyone could pull off such a scam and tell such a lie. And we have, of course, a precedence for this. People say, "Oh, yeah, that's far-fetched." Well, how far-fetched was it? We're talking about 2001. How about Operation Northwoods, that was planned? This is in the official documents from the official archive. That was planned in 1962 during the Kennedy administration, not by Kennedy, but by the Joint Chiefs of Staff at the Pentagon, headed by the chairman, a guy called Lemnitzer. Now, what came to light with these Northwood documents was a plan whereby, wait for this, the military would orchestrate apparent terrorist attacks by Castro's Cuba in American cities. New York, Miami, etc. were named. They would attack American shipping and claim it was an attack from Cuba. And here's one part of the Operation Northwoods document. They planned to have a plane that was on a scheduled route from an East Coast airport down south that took it across Cuban airspace at a very high altitude. The plan described how another plane, a drone, flown from the ground, which is what I say the planes that hit the Twin Towers were, it would be painted in exactly the same livery as the plane leaving the airport on a scheduled flight. And it says in the document, on that scheduled plane would be, quote, carefully selected passengers. The plane would then go on its route, and this is all described in the document, in the official record. And this drone would take off from Eglin Air Force Base in Florida, and would get so close to the scheduled plane that it would appear as one blip. The scheduled plane would then land at Eglin, and the drone would be flown across Cuba and exploded by radio signal. And they even say in the document, we won't say it's happened, we'll let the international aviation authorities tell us it's happened because that will give us more credibility. And they were going to blame the attack on Cuba to justify an invasion of Cuba. And apparently Kennedy sacked Lemnitzer when he found out, but he actually went on to become a bigwig at NATO.